Well, every CPAC's a little different, but they all share obviously the common theme of being a place where people who have conservative ideas, who are interested in sort of the conservative movement, can get together and be around people who think the same way. So in a way, it's kind of refreshing, sort of recharges your energy almost in what we're trying to do. They always give a good sense of the state of the conservative movement in the United States, of course, but you also get there's foreign visitors here as well, so you get a sense of Australia, Europe, Latin America, and Korea as well, of course. So it's really a good chance to get a lot of information, to make a lot of connections, and also to help share the details of what we're doing with other people. We've been very fortunate this year to once again make a lot of connections, particularly with, say, politicians and Capitol Hill people. That'll be very useful for us in the future as we're trying to raise awareness and trying to educate on the realities of the Korean Peninsula, the realities of South Korea. So they say they all share some common aspects, but they will always vary, particularly because of the state of the world, the state of the United States. That'll be there's obviously some differences, just that's natural. Well, it was a good breakout session. It was actually every seat was taken. The topic was Asia's next war and the threat to democracy in South Korea. And it was focused on the South Korean situation, and particularly the risks to the alliance that exist, the risks to democracy that actually exist in South Korea that most Americans are not aware of. Even many politicians are unaware of it. And that's what we're trying to highlight and also suggest some ways to actually improve the situation. And we're fortunate to have a very good panel because we had Gordon Chang, who's very well known, of course, as the moderator. And then we had Professor Sung-Yoon Lee from Tufts University, who's absolute expert on North Korea, South Korean politics, and understands the American end of it as well. We had Senator Bill Hagerty, and we had Ambassador Morse Tan, who once again is a real expert on North Korea's human rights, and then I was on it as well. So we were able to provide our information from a number of different perspectives, and each speaker has his own personality. And Gordon Chang tied it all together just very well. So anyone who came, I think, would have left with an understanding of the basics, that there is a threat to democracy on the Korean Peninsula, that it's and Korean leftists are basically the ones that pose it. And also that there's a threat that with a premature effort to reach a peace treaty in South Korea, with North Korea, that will potentially lead to the removal of U.S. troops from the peninsula. And once that happens, North Korea is going to sort of run, and you'll have a war pretty quickly. And that also removing U.S. troops is to China's benefit as well. So we're able to introduce some ideas that I think most people were not aware of. And it also provides that understanding, gives you sort of a basis on which to understand the Korean Peninsula, and also to, if you're a politician, for example, or an official, to know what to be aware of, what to be alert to, in order to avoid creating instability on the peninsula. Yes, I think it's increasing, and if we weren't here, there would be very little attention paid to it. But it's the South Korean situation, the Korean Peninsula, is something that does need to be highlighted. People have to educate, and that's one of the things that we do. So, because there's a lot of things going on in the world, and it's important for us to speak up so that South Korea, the Korean Peninsula, and Northeast Asia gets the attention that it deserves. So by being here, you can see it's a very good way to draw in a good audience and to help them have better understanding of the situation. South Korea is definitely in danger. But you have to think it through. And one way you would describe this is if Putin is successful in Ukraine, say he gets what he wants, then China will see that because they're watching, they're taking notes, and it might encourage China to have launch an assault on Taiwan. And if that happens, then South Korea is in very grave danger, not least that South Korea's shipping lanes, all the transport into and out of South Korea, will be potentially cut by the Chinese. And I think an economy like South Korea, a country like South Korea, would have a very hard time if China were to sort of turn the screws on them. But also, in the event of a Taiwan conflict, one should expect that North Korea will do something. It could be launch missiles into South Korea, even launch an assault, launch missiles into Japan as well. But just say cause trouble as a way to distract attention away from Taiwan. So we should expect, in the event of instability, in the event of conflict in Asia, that even if it isn't directed at South Korea, that South Korea will be definitely affected by that. So you have to sort of think it through, but it's a sequence of events that could happen that will make South Korea have some problems. And also, China is pretty darn close to North Korea, and it is in Chinese interests to have the North Koreans cause trouble, because it diverts attention away from China, away from Taiwan. And it also, in America, there's a lot of Americans and politicians and officials who think that America has to go easy on China because America needs China's help to solve the North Korea problem, which is wrong, because China is the country that backs up North Korea, and without China, North Korea would collapse. Whenever North Korea shoots off missiles, China has kind of given them the go-ahead in some fashion. And so that's how we see it. Oh, not at all. I think that's completely wrong. I think China has always supported North Korea. China has helped North Korea develop its missile technologies, its nuclear weapons. It's provided the the oil and food that the country depends on. And it's China that has actually propped up North Korea. And China is very happy to have North Korea there causing trouble. The idea that the North Koreans and the Chinese are somehow ready to fight each other, I think that's wishful thinking on the part of really too many people who should know better. Between Koreans and Chinese in general, there's always a certain friction or tension in the relationship. At the country-to-country level, no, I think that that has never been the case. Well, Kcpac is, as I mentioned, it's trying to do for conservatism in Korea what the Kcpac does in America. It's ultimately to support conservative ideas, the conservative movement within South Korea. And one way that we do that, of course, is to help educate audiences in the United States, particularly in Washington, on Capitol Hill, where there's not a full understanding of the realities of the situation in South Korea, particularly the political world, and nor the peninsula in general. So we play an educational role. We go out and meet people. We provide information. We write information papers and reports. And for example, we've put together a booklet recently that has essays by leading scholars in the American and South Korean to help explain the realities of reaching peace on the Korean Peninsula. And this is a response, really, to a bill that has been introduced in Congress called H.R. 3446, the so-called Peace on the Korean Peninsula Act. It was provided by a leftist member of the U.S. Congress with the encouragement of American activists, Korean activists as well. So we have tried to explain to people what the dangers are, what the risks are. And so it's a very well-written book with short essays, and that's the way we educate. But we also get out and we meet with congressional staff and politicians as well, and both sides of the aisle, not just Republicans, but Democrats as well. And we I have a One Korea Network website that has we have regular reports, news, reports, daily articles that help illuminate the realities of South Korean politics and the U.S.-South Korean alliance and beyond. We also look at the entire region. We also put on events seminars, sort of web events as well. And when the COVID doesn't exist, we put on a larger Kcpac gathering in Seoul. Conservatives don't speak up.
Yeah.
That not many people are going to notice. And there's a real strength in, say, speaking up and bringing together people who share similar interests and perspectives. They're not identical, but they're similar. And they all do have a sense in the importance of individual liberty, freedoms, consensual government, and at least two-party rule. That is one of the concerns that a lot of us feel about South Korea, is the fear that there will be a sort of one-party rule forever.
Yeah.
And we know what a disaster that is when that happens. And that is, there's some real concern that is the intention, really, of the left. There's a leftist faction in the Korean body politic. And you could easily turn South Korea into another Venezuela without a whole lot of effort, if we're not careful. We have made an effort to go around to parts of the United States and to, once again, explain our conservative positions, explain our position, particularly on these ill-advised, misguided efforts to reach peace on the Korean Peninsula. And it's fake peace. It will actually lead to war. But we've been out explaining these our position. And I've gone around, and some of my colleagues have also. So it's almost a conservative rival to these other organizations which you mentioned, and a lot of these other organizations do have very questionable backing. 30 plus sponsors for a bill is not many. The fact that it hasn't gotten more sponsorship, attracted more attention, is important to remember that. But it is something, as you say, if you're not careful, that these proposals all sound good because they're very alluring. We just want peace.
It doesn't have the human rights aspect of it at all.
Never mention it at all. And that's something to remember. All of the talk, or all of the efforts by these other groups, the bills that get proposed, their policy proposals, they never mention human rights. Never. As if they don't care about the suffering of North Koreans. And that is unfathomable. It's hard to understand. And they never mention it. So I guess it's okay to torture North Koreans, but it just doesn't make any sense. So that is something that we do highlight, and we're not against peace. We want peace on the Korean Peninsula. Who doesn't? The other side has to want it too. And there's no sign North Korea does. But also we think that human rights ought to be front and center of any effort to deal with North Korea. You cannot ignore it. You cannot postpone it and say, well, we'll take care of it later. No, you never will. It has to be addressed immediately. And to us, the suffering of North Koreans is something we never forget about. One of our staff is an escapee from North Korea. And it takes a certain kind of heartlessness to ignore human rights. And we're not willing to do that. So but we do, as I said, we get out about in the Korean American community on both coasts, north and south, and in Hawaii. And we do meet with them and educate them. We're very moved with the amount of support that we've received. If you don't get out and talk to people and show them how they can contact their congressman, how they can sign petitions, the support tends to be it's latent and it never comes up. So we're trying to bring it up, the Korean American community. And one thing you note as you get out and about among them is these are absolute American patriots. They're just very interested in South Korea and events there, but they're just the finest Americans that you'll see. But within any community, there's differing opinions. They're all God's children. And I've just been really impressed with the people that I've been fortunate enough to talk to deal with, but it does require what is called in English a ground game.
A ground game.
Yeah, which is getting out and
Grassroots stuff.
that's really grassroots movement, people who get out, you organize and talk to their congressmen, make it clear what their positions are. Because otherwise, congressmen only hear from one side. And they tend to think, well, all Korean Americans think like this. But no, it's not all Korean Americans do. And if that's all you hear, you tend to extrapolate and think, well, all Korean Americans think that. So Kcpac is trying to present this alternative. And we're also actually putting together our own draft bill, which would actually aim for real peace on the peninsula, which would guarantee the United States doesn't reach a treaty unless it can be verified and confirmed that North Korea is going to reduce its military capability, reduce its threat. That's going to require that human rights are front and center, that until the human rights issue is addressed, no treaty. Require that sanctions be put on if necessary, or enforced for the first time to keep the pressure on, and require North Korea to change, not us to change. The other side has the problem, not us. But we should be careful, though, when, as you said, when we negotiate with somebody to try to reach a treaty, that the other side has to want to change its behavior. South Korea doesn't have prison camps. It doesn't have concentration camps. It doesn't murder political prisoners. North Korea does. And they're the ones that have to change. It's not South Korea. So that's, it's something that needs more attention needs to be paid to that. And, the Moon administration having criminalized the activity of human rights activists in South Korea is not something that a civilized democratic nation does. And the fact that they do it does raise some very serious concerns about the intentions of a future leftist administration in South Korea. Are they going to strangle democracy? One has some real suspicions about that, and need to be on guard. And hopefully, it won't happen. Sure. I'm a former U.S. Marine officer. I used to work for the State Department as well as an American diplomat, worked for an investment bank in Asia for a long time and for a high-tech company. So I'm a lawyer. But I've done a few things. So I have a different perspective on affairs in Asia and global affairs as well. And I've always been particularly interested in Northeast Asia. My first experience in South Korea was with one of the Team Spirit exercises. I think it was 1986. So I've been going in and out of Korea for, 35 years now, and pretty familiar with, and I've done with the country. I've done business in South Korea, and I've also, with the government, with the military, I've been involved in military affairs on the peninsula. And I was at one point the head of intelligence for the Marines in the Pacific. So I'm familiar with the defense aspects, the economic angles, the political part, and the cultural issues as well. And I have a lot of experience with Japan, of course. So I tend to, in China. So I tend to look at, I don't focus on one country, but
East Asia.
That's a good way to put it. And so I've gotten very interested in the situation on the Korean Peninsula in recent years. And that's what led me to Kcpac. And I enjoy being, particularly getting to meet a lot of Koreans and Korean Americans, but also
You have more Korean American friends than most people.
a few. And also, though, it's good to be able to explain the realities of the peninsula to other Americans. In particular, because you do see just the misperceptions about it, and I'd like to point, and I'm glad to point out how delicate the relationship is, how delicate the situation is, and it does need careful tending, a lot of attention, to preserve this alliance, preserve the stability that's really has allowed South Korea to develop, really from a very just flattened, war-ravaged country into what it is today. And that's my background, and I say it's you never quite know where a career will lead, but it's important work we're doing, I think. It certainly creates an awareness of South Korea. I think South Korea is much better known than it was, say, 10, 20 years ago. And those cultural sort of achievements or something that people now know, that they hear South Korea and they know exactly what it is. There's more sort of brand awareness. But really, the North Korea and its missiles, nuclear weapons, that has done a lot too to raise public and political awareness of the Korean Peninsula. So I think Dictator Kim has that to his credit, that he's helped many, many Americans recognize the threat from North Korea.
Thank you very much, Grant, for your time.
Pleasure. Okay.